Hello friends, you're on Ruslan Belov's channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of September 11th, 2025. So let's go over the situation along the line of contact. Today's video material will begin directly with the Zaporizhzhia sector of the front, where the Vostok troop grouping continues its offensive. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has once again managed to significantly expand its zone of control and move a bit closer to the main supply artery, the R85 road, which connects the settlements of Hulyapol and Pokrovska. Today, 2 videos from this sector were published by Russian sources. The first video came from the territory of Novomykolaiivka. Here are the frames, and we can observe a one-story building. At the very bottom, possibly at the door or the entrance to this building, stands a Russian soldier holding a Russian tricolor flag. From this angle and distance, it may be difficult to see clearly, but the flag is there, clearly visible, as are the outlines of the Russian soldier. Naturally, the building was immediately geolocated. Overall, these frames confirm the information that the Russian army has at least entered the southeastern part of Novomykolaiivka. It is possible that Ukrainian units are still present in the northwestern part. This area is shown in the footage. Heavy fighting may be ongoing there right now. However, if we look at the video as a whole, no smoke or traces of combat can be observed in the area of the village, whether in the southeastern or northwestern parts. This suggests that the settlement may have been abandoned by Ukrainian formations, as holding positions there has already become impossible, and it is likely that the Russian army has already moved further west. A bit further north, information came from a settlement called Sosnivka. Since early morning, various cartographers, including neutral and pro-Ukrainian ones, marked this sector, coloring Sosnivka in favor of the Russian armed forces. However, we were waiting for confirmation either from the Ministry of Defense or from the Vostok troop grouping, and it came literally a few hours later. These frames are being published today directly by the Vostok troop grouping, or more precisely, by Telegram channels affiliated with it. Here we can see how the fighting for this settlement unfolded. Artillery strikes, aviation, artillery preparation, and drone operations. And, as tradition has it, in the final seconds of this video material, we can see several locations within Sosnivka where Russian soldiers raised tricolor flags. In total, according to this footage, 3 flags were raised in the settlement. 1 in the southern part, 1 in the eastern part, and 1 in the northern part. This leaves no doubt that Sosnivka has indeed come under the full and confident control of the Russian armed forces. And before we move further, let's take a look at how the map was updated. This is how the map looked yesterday. Today, corresponding updates have been made. Once again, the southeastern part of Novomykolaiivka and the entirety of Sosnivka have been marked. At the moment, the distance from Sosnivka to the R85 road is approximately 20 kilometers. This is already a sufficient distance for the effective use of Russian FPV drones. However, the Russian side is not yet rushing to establish full fire control over this road. Apparently the goal is to reduce the distance to at least 10-15 kilometers, after which we will likely see a large number of objective control videos showing destroyed equipment along this road. And now, before we move further, today a number of OSINT researchers, as well as those closely following the situation in the Special Military Operations Zone, noted that the pro-Ukrainian cartographers from the Deep State team have once again disappeared. Today is September 11th, 2025. The last update on their maps was on September 7th, that is, 4 days ago. Today they finally updated their map, focusing mainly on the Pokrovsk direction as well as the Seredina-Buda forestry area. But overall, it once again creates the impression that this resource, namely Syrsky's team and the Ukrainian General Staff, is applying pressure with the aim of minimizing updates on the maps that would favor the Russian armed forces in the current very difficult situation. Because, let me remind you, the Russian side is actively advancing in the Zaporizhzhia sector. Literally every week, 2, 3, even 4 videos are published showing Russian units raising flags in Yanuarske, in Novoselivka, in Voronezh, in Zaporizhzhia, in Koroshe, and today in Sosnivka. But if you follow pro-Ukrainian cartographers, their map updates in these areas are minimal. This suggests some kind of conflict and pressure, And right now it seems the picture is one where strong pressure is being exerted on the pro-Ukrainian resource so that updates, at least these days, are only made in directions favorable to Kursk, and of course that includes the Pokrovsk direction. Because if we talk about corrections overall, then yes, there is some information indicating that at the moment very heavy and fierce fighting is underway in this area. So let's go step by step, and let's start with the corrections provided by neutral and pro-Ukrainian cartographic services. Today, neutral cartographers confirmed that the Ukrainian army is indeed continuing its counter-offensive, the goal of which is to completely cut off the salient of the Russian breakthrough. Let me remind you, in the early days of August 2025, the Russian side began its special operation. It was difficult to call that operation a full-scale breakthrough, because it was mainly carried out by special units from sabotage reconnaissance groups rather than regular army forces. The task of those groups was to infiltrate as deeply as possible, find gaps in the Ukrainian defense, and penetrate towards settlements such as Rodinska, Bilitska, and Dobropilya. And almost instantly, as if on cue, all these hidden cells became active, which subsequently led to significant changes on the map. A large number of Ukrainian groups found themselves encircled, unable to resist and hold their defense. The front line in many microsectors collapsed. As a result, Russian units advanced as far as the settlements of Petrovka and Novodyani. When the Ukrainian side regained its bearings, after mid-August, it launched a counter-offensive that has now been ongoing for nearly a month. But if we look at how the map has been updated, at least in terms of geolocated Russian advances, we see almost no corrections. Yes, there were changes in territories marked by different cartographers as contested or grey zone. But contested or grey zones, by definition, are areas that don't receive either a yellow or red colouring, if we're talking, for example, about our map. Once again, let me emphasize, if we're talking about the territories that were specifically geolocated under the control of the Russian Federation since the breakthrough, only a very small portion of them has been recolored back in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces as a result of the ongoing counter-offensive. So let's compare the maps for clarity. Here is the situation around the settlement of Vladimirovka as of the end of September 10, 2025. According to mostly pro-Ukrainian and neutral cartographers, Ukrainians already controlled at least the northern part. By the end of September 11th, however, information appeared that the Ukrainian army continued its advance south and southeast in this direction. If we look at the updates today provided by pro-Ukrainian cartographers from the Deep State team, which resurfaced after 4 days of silence, we can see that not only was Vladimirovka recolored in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. Today we see a significant expansion of the grey zone all the way to the settlement of Novotoretsk. In other words, Ukrainian cartographers are telling us that in the past 24 hours there have been heavy, intense battles along this line. And as a result of those battles, the Ukrainian side has managed to secure either the central or northern part of Novotoretsk. This is, in fact, a very significant development, since not only is the Ukrainian army advancing southward from Vladimirovka toward Novotoretsk, but there is also information that in recent days, Ukrainian forces advanced toward the settlement of Razino. If we try to do some calculations, then according to pro-Ukrainian cartographers and sources, the Russian side is currently holding a corridor of roughly 4 kilometers, or slightly less, between Novotoretsk and Razino. This is essentially a bottleneck or a safety corridor, if it can even be called that, for the Russian army, which continues to maintain a circular defense in the Rodinske, Suketske, Zatishke, Zaporizhzhia, Novoshakove area, and further north toward Kucherev Yar. If this bottleneck narrows further, or if the Ukrainian side fully clears Novotoretsk or pushes into Razino, then the Russian troop grouping inside the breakthrough zone will end up completely encircled, trapped in a pocket. So right now, the battles over this Novotoretsk-Razino bottleneck are perhaps the fiercest since the beginning of the special military operation, despite the silence and the information vacuum. Today, the fate of all of Donbas and the remainder of the Donetsk region may be decided here. If the Russian side manages to hold these positions, it will be a disastrous outcome for the Ukrainian side. On the other hand, most military experts agree that in order to cut off this salient, Ukraine is committing the elite of its forces. The 79th, 12th Brigades, and other newly formed powerful units that once held extremely tough sectors, such as Vuhledar, Novorodske, and the Serebryanka forest. These units are now here, not in defense, but in counter-offensive mode, meaning they are continuously taking losses, and clearly not on a 1-to-1 ratio, as we all understand. At the same time, the Russian army is entrenched on these territories, not retreating, fighting fiercely for every centimeter. Until the situation with this Razino-Novotoretske bottleneck is resolved, we should not expect significant map changes in the near future. It should also be noted that for now the information vacuum will likely continue. This mainly indicates that neither side holds full initiative. Both still have some resources left for relentless assaults and strikes. A real shift in information will probably only come toward the end of September, when both sides will be able to assess the price paid for this stubborn fight and what direction the situation will take. Despite the fact that Ukraine is clearly grinding down its strongest units here, the Russian army continues active offensives on other sectors. Let's move on to the Konstantinovka direction. Today there are very important updates. The main ones come from the area of Alexander Shultine, Pritichne, and the Siversky Donetsk-Donbas Canal. Ukrainian sources have published this video footage showing Ukrainian FPV drone operators striking Russian army positions in the fields. Looking at the map, you can see a yellow line here. This marks a large former Ukrainian strongpoint. That strongpoint is now under Russian control, at least according to objective control footage. Here are the strikes against Russian infantry along these fortifications. Overall, these videos confirm that the Russian army is advancing southward from Pritichne toward Alexander Shultin in an attempt to break Ukrainian resistance at strongpoints slightly to the east. But judging by the footage now being published by the Russian side, Ukrainian units are gradually withdrawing from this direction. We can see a series of FPV drone strikes on Ukrainian equipment and troops attempting to retreat toward Konstantinovka. It appears that the large forested area south of Stupochki and Chasiv Yar, under Ukrainian control, has already been cut off from supply. There is a high likelihood that within the next night or several days, Ukraine will finish evacuating its troops from this sector. This would allow the Russian army to finally straighten the front line and secure a strong foothold for further offensives, either toward the southeast of Konstantinovka or toward Nelipivka, Ivapil and Pleshcheyevka. Important updates also concern the Kleban-Beek Reservoir. Although some cartographers have already recolored areas south of Kleban-Beek entirely in favor of Russia, footage still shows Ukrainian logistics and crossings operating there. In one episode, Ukrainian troops tried to move supplies, water, or ammunition across a makeshift structure from the north to the south bank. But Russian reconnaissance detected it, and a strike was immediately carried out. The structure was destroyed before reaching Ukrainian units on the southern bank. This proves that Ukrainian formations are still present on the southern shore of the Kleban-Beek Reservoir, along the forested area of the regional landscape park. Hence, maps should roughly reflect this. Separately, Western analysts are unanimously reporting that the Russian army has intensified activity in the Yablunivka sector. Recall that active combat there ended about 1.5 to 2 months ago. Since then, there was regrouping and fortification. Now, after that phase, Russian forces seem to be resuming activity toward the N32 and N20 highways to reach the northern bank of the Kleban-Beek Reservoir. Strategically, this is logical. Why waste effort clearing forests if the positions can be bypassed and struck from the north, forcing Ukrainian troops to abandon the southern bank altogether? Now, let's move toward the Serebryanka forest. As usual, many geolocations are published daily. Pro-Ukrainian cartographers confirm that clearing continues along the Siversky Donets River, and the zone of clearance has already reached the settlement of Serebryanka. Neutral cartographers report Ukrainian counterstrikes aimed at possibly unblocking part of Serebryanka. These are understandable, since several dozen or even a few hundred Ukrainian soldiers appear to be trapped in the forest, unable to cross the river southward due to constant Russian artillery and drone fire. Counterattacks are being launched to secure flanks for retreating units, which are trapped between Russian positions to the north, east, and west, and the Siversky Donets River to the south. Here's one example of reconnaissance along forested areas near the river. These positions are regularly struck by Russian artillery and drones to disrupt logistics and supply routes, Now let's move to the Lyman sector. Today, many expected that the Russian Ministry of Defense, or pro-Russian sources, would update the map by fully recoloring the settlement of Zarechne. However, for the first time in several days, no video evidence was published confirming additional Russian advances there. Previously, we saw step-by-step progress, with less and less territory remaining under Ukrainian control by the end of September 11. Despite the lack of updates today, it seems likely that in the coming days, the Ministry of Defense will confirm full control of the village. At that point, the battles for Lyman will officially begin. As for Shandry-Holov, reports indicate that the southern part has now been fully cleared. The settlement is divided by a small stream or channel with a bridge. The southern part has been secured, while Ukrainian forces remain only in the central sector, preparing to withdraw. Kupiansk sector, no changes. Sumy and Vovchansk directions, also no changes. And that's all for today, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.